happen? The company will start coming under the burden of, company will start getting under the burden of this debt, and it will be overwhelmed. And what might happen is that the business of the company might start getting affected because of the crisis. That might be happening anyways. If the company does not have money to pay its dues, short-term dues, then how can it do business? Slowly the business will die, right? So there is a problem. There's a problem of insolvency. That is, somebody was doing business, some company was doing a business, maybe some LLP was doing a business, and that company is not able to pay its dues. So what are we doing now? We are saying that yes, let us look at what are the other objectives of IBC. So it says it improves the ease of doing business in India. So what is the ease of doing business that it improves? यहाँ तो आप कह रहे हो कि यार insolvency and bankruptcy code लाते हैं हम, तो हम कहते हैं कि कंपनी जो है उसको हम क्या कर रहे हैं, उसको एक रेजोल्यूशन दे रहे हैं, उसकी प्रॉब्लम को रेजोल्यूशन दे रहे हैं. व्हाट इज द प्रॉब्लम ऑफ इंसॉल्वेंसी इज बीइंग गिवन अ solution. So but how are we easing the or improving the ease of doing business? Anyone who can share their thoughts on this?
It is going from the process of debtors regime to creditors regime. So creditor,
Okay.
the lender will take control of the company, and he will try to pass on the company to some other company or prospective promoter who can run the company and pay the existing creditors.
So there is a possible change in management. So there is a possible change in management in the IBC process in the long run. And of course, in the short run, yes, the CARP process says that the management needs to be taken over by the RP, and then he will do the management for the time being. And yes, maybe there is a chance that the company does not go to the original promoters and it goes to somebody else. There is a high chance of that, and that is what has been happening in the past. But how do you improve ease of doing business when you talk about IBC? Whatever Siva sir said, that involved, transferring the business to somebody else. But how are you easing the doing business in India?
In the existing process, the funds of the creditors are held up for years together. But in the new regime, in the IBC regime, either the company will be taken over by somebody or it will be liquidated, and the amount lent by the creditors will be reduced, so that they can banks or financial institutions can recycle the funds. Otherwise, it's held up.
So, Mr. Prasad, your voice was not audible. Maybe you can check on your network also. But whatever I heard, I think what you're talking about is the last point. That is, you maximize the value of assets by doing something about them rather than leaving them with, whoever they are with.
Yes.
Yes. So what do we talk about? What do we make sense out of improving the ease of doing business? When we say ease of doing business, what is ease of doing business? Is ease of doing business only restricted to registering a company in 2 days, or maybe getting the government license to start doing a business in very few days? No. So the ease of doing business also involves, if you look at the World Bank ratings for ease of doing business, you will see that the ease of doing business in India, or the ease of doing business rankings also takes into account the ease of shutting down a business. Because if you start a business, if you start a company, the World Bank says that it is not important or compulsory that your business has to survive. Businesses might fail, right? But if they fail, then you should have a way to close the business. So anyone amongst us who can tell me that was there a way of shutting down a business before IBC? Say you
Yes,
have
as per
financial
Companies Act,
stress.
voluntary
Yes.
liquidation is there.
So that liquidation did it not require a solvency certificate?
Yes.
So what about an insolvent company which is not able to pay its dues? How does that company go down? How does that company shut its operations? So there was a problem that if somebody is insolvent, some company is insolvent, it is not able to pay its dues, it was not able to shut its business. It was not able to go out openly and say that, okay, I tried doing this business, I was not successful in doing this business, and therefore I want to wind up. But IBC gives that opportunity to that company, to that promoter who has genuinely tried to do business, who has not done any hanky panky, who has not done any fraud, who has not siphoned off any funds, but yes, who genuinely suffered a loss, that person can now say that, okay, I'm filing an application under section 10 of IBC, and please take me to insolvency. Please rescue my company for whatever it has remaining, and please give me an exit out of this business. So in a way, it also then promotes entrepreneurship, because in case you know that today, if I do business, if I start a new business, and if it does not work out, then I know that if I start the business with maybe a crore rupee, then that is what I will lose. I will not lose my life savings and trying to make that company work, despite the fact that I've lost that 1 crore rupee that I invested, right? So it promotes entrepreneurship, because then now you know that yes, if it does not work, then you can always write that amount off, whatever you plan to invest, and then start life again. So then you improve availability of credit at low markup. What does this mean? When banks give credit, banks add a markup. Why is that markup in India, or why is it believed that the markup in India is more than international markup? Because of the NPAs. So in case the bank say there is a 5% NPA, and you say, oh wow, there's a 5% NPA, so I will have to cover up that 5% loss in the form of additional interest that I am levying on my people, right? So that is what then you look at, and then that is the additional or availability of credit at low markup that you take care of, or that is how you improve the availability of credit at a lower markup. Balance the interest of all stakeholders. How is the IBC balancing the interest of all stakeholders? It is giving more power to the creditor. Don't you think that the creditor in India is toothless, or has been toothless before IBC? If somebody owes you money, चक्कर लगाते रहो, केस करते रहो, 15 साल निकल जाते हैं, 20 साल निकल जाते हैं, पैसे नहीं आते हाथ, right? So objective IBC में क्या हुआ? IBC में now that if your dispute, if your case is there, if you have the right to take money from somebody, there is no dispute with that person, then you can file a case under IBC and say and claim that yes, this company should be insolvent because this company is not giving me money, and it genuinely owes this money to me. Then lastly, about maximization of value of assets. So imagine so many companies that have now gone into IBC, now gone into insolvency. The new promoters who have now come in, the new promoters or resolution applicants, who are also called white knights. Now, what are these white knights doing? They have got a certain asset. They have control over those assets. They are now putting in additional money, bringing in their own manpower, their expertise, their management expertise, and using the same assets which were not able to perform earlier. They are now increasing the production, and trying to derive more value from the assets. This is a brief on this is a chart which I have dug out, or you will find similar charts coming up. So this is a chart which shows the number of insolvency cases, the CIRP processes that have been ongoing. So you will see that 2017 up to March 17, there were hardly about 37 odd cases which were admitted. And yes, March 18, it increased to 743. So about 700 cases got added in that period in this 1 year. Then yes, next year again about 1150 cases got added in March 19 this year. March 20, it increased by a whopping 1900 or 19 to 2000 cases. And then we have the next year, that is March 21, only about 500 odd cases, 400 odd cases that added. And then in June 21, this 1 quarter, we have seen an increase of about 130 cases in the total CIRP cases that are ongoing. And yes, there is a reasonable jump in the closure of the cases. So we see closures happening, and we see ongoing cases which came down in March 21 are about the same in June 21. So what is the what can you figure out of these numbers? Now let me tell you that the COVID came in and there was a bar on initiating new cases on new defaults, number one. That happened in March 21. It started in April 2020 and then ended in March 21, that moratorium on new cases. The second thing and the more important thing that happened in April 2020 was that the limit for CARP cases or to initiate CARP, the default limit has been increased from 1 lakh rupees to 1 crore rupee. So a lot of cases which started or which were CARP started, those cases are now no longer there in NCLT because the default amount or the threshold amount has increased. So going forward, what is the outlook? The outlook is that yes, it will be lesser cases as long as.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, go ahead, sir.
The point is this: the correction which taken place rather change 1 lakh to 1 crore. So what we understand earlier, the defaulting amount, suppose X, which was coming under insolvency, bankruptcy court cases, now threshold limit has been increased or some other thing is there. What is 1 crore?
1 crore is a default amount. So in case there is a default, a single default has to be more than 1 crore rupee for the case for the CIP to start.
Single case or put together also?
Single case is the system.
Or earlier it was 1 lakh.
Earlier it was 1 lakh. So
it's a huge gap between 1 crore and 1 lakh.
And yes, the government says that yes, they did this to give relief to MSMEs. But I know many MSMEs which were using this 1 lakh rupee limit to claim their dues, and they were not able to. They are now no longer able to claim the dues. What we understand being a true reason to control this is the limitation in NCLT. Just give me a second. There's some noise coming. Let me try and block this. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So basically we are.
Yeah.
Please go ahead. Please tell.
Yeah, this all new cases should be there provided 1 crore default is there, but what were the cases pending as on date will be on hold or will not be part of in this code at all?
So there has been various judgments there, but then the popular opinion seems to be that whoever had already applied under the 1 lakh rupee limit to the court, that application will be heard by the NCLT as long as that application was filed before this amendment was introduced.
The point is the only new cases will not come for a lesser value.
Yes, exactly.
So the point is telling this is the case of entry there to the demarcation point.
This is the entry to?
NCLT code.
Yeah, the NCLT, then NCLT will have lesser rush, right? And NCLT has a pressure, there is a capacity issue in NCLT. So that is what is this about.
So time being, sir, this 1 crore is for further decision till further decision or some
1 crore is now almost permanent. The government has already notified the increased limit and the government might decrease that at a future date once the load on the NCLT decreases or the backlog of the NCLT decreases. So in case you look at the 1682 matters which are still ongoing, all these are matters which have to be heard by NCLT, right? So this is what needs to be taken care of. And then there's so many applications which are pending for hearing in NCLT where the CIRP has not started. That also needs to be taken care of. There's so many applications with respect to fraudulent transactions where the CIRP has been closed, but those applications are still required to be heard. So all these things require time and effort from the NCLT. That is what would be the focus of NCLT before the government maybe again considers revising this limit downward.
Very nice, sir. Very clear. This I feel more than 50% in the industries are in relief situation.
So going forward, we have this chart which talks about what happens to every CRP case. So if you see, there's 47 odd % cases go into liquidation, then appeal, reviews, settled is 23%, withdrawn under section 12A. Under 12A is a section which allows the applicant who has taken the company to CARP to withdraw the application in case his dues are paid. And then lastly, we have a resolution plan, so that's about 14%. Of course, the idea is that the resolution plan approval number should ideally be higher, more cases can be resolved. But then we need to understand that, when we look at CARP in India and we look at the few big cases, or the bigger cases that come in, and our experience with when we have dealt with 200 odd cases is that a lot of cases, the stress is old stress, as old as 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. It's very old, and to expect that suddenly that company will start working is very, very difficult, because उसका already सब लोगों ने उसको निचोड़ा हुआ है, promoters ने भी, bankers ने भी. So very, very small chance that those companies could survive or somebody could find value in them. In many cases, yes, the business was also faulty, or the technology was old. There was no chance that the business could survive, and so on. So the idea is that so basically it has these notes, and then this has been, of course, compiled from the website of the NCLT, and this has been compiled by IBBI itself. This is a chart of showing how the various industries have had CARP cases. Not something very, very important, but you will find that, yes, a lot of different, it is the insolvency cases have been spread across industries. This is what you will notice from this. And it is not that any, Chandra ji, can you mute yourself? So basically, the idea is that various industries, this is what has happened when the cases have closed, and then there are a lot of ongoing cases also. So this is a chart which might help you understand that, yes, that insolvency is there in almost all industries, and then there are opportunities available for resolution applicants in all industries. So today, a lot of companies are doing inorganic growth by aiming to acquire some companies which are under CARP in the same industry, and that is how then those industries are able to, those assets can be revived. Then we look at who initiates CARPs. So you will see that initially corporate debtors initiated CARPs because there was a belief that, yes, this is the new BIFR. We will go as promoters, go under insolvency, and we will take our company back after reducing the effective debt. And slowly amendments were introduced, 29A was introduced, other amendments were introduced, which cut down that possibility and said that, no, if a promoter has an NPA, then there are certain things and other items which bar the promoter from taking the company back. And then subsequently you will see that the number of corporate debtor applications have remained lesser, and yes, the operational creditors have been filing the maximum possible applications. All right. Then what is expected out of an insolvency professional? So an IP must maintain integrity by being honest, straightforward, and forthright in all professional relationships. Should have good communication skills. He must maintain complete independence without external influence. All these are requirements. All these are expectations from an insolvency professional. Qualifications. So one has to have a 10-year post-qualification experience for CA, CS, cost accountant, advocate, and and that is one criteria. Or one has to have a 15-year management experience after the bachelor's degree. Then one has to pass limited insolvency examination within 12 months within 12 months before the date of his application for enrollment. And then application of completion of 50 hours pre-registration course conducted by IPAs is required, and he should not be in employment at the time of making application for enrollment, and should have a minimum CIBIL score of 650. And an insolvency professional can also continue his profession. So these are the requirements to become an insolvency professional. Then in future, apart from this, now we also have a graduate insolvency program. It is a 27-month course, which happens after completion of professional courses, and it is a mix of classroom study and practical experience. And then first batch has already graduated in 2021, and second batch had started in 2020. And I think currently the admissions are open for GIP course. There is also this earlier this was being done by IICA. Now National Law Institute University Bhopal has also been allowed to take up this course. The National Insolvency Program is again something that they're thinking of introducing maybe later once this profession stabilizes. There they will be targeting students, young bright students after 12th standard, who might like to go for a 5-year course and become insolvency professionals. That is something that is part of the rules, the act. But yes, it is something that is yet to be prescribed or yet to start. When we look at insolvency professionals who are registered with IBBI, we see the following opportunities available to them. They can be interim resolution professionals. Interim resolution professionals are appointed by NCLT before on the CRP start date itself. And when you read the word interim resolution professional, you understand that the resolution professional here is interim for the want of approval of the COC. So the idea is that if you look at the basic structure of IBBI or IBC rather, or CIRP rather, you will see that what is happening effectively is that the shareholders are being replaced by the creditors, or the committee of creditors then sits, and the management, that is the directors and the management, they are replaced by the in a sense they are replaced by the RP. And this is how then the company is run, using the new management, and then the insolvency professional has to work under instruction from the COC, and various approvals, including financial approvals, are required to be obtained by the insolvency professional from the COC. So interim resolution professional is the ad hoc, is the resolution professional who is appointed either by the court's own choice, or because of the choice of the resolution, because of the choice of the applicant, or the person who has taken the company to court, to NCLT, has filed an application and against that company. And then, of course, one can then become a resolution professional once the COC confirms the appointment. Alternatively, the COC can then appoint some other insolvency professional as the resolution professional. Liquidator, so once the company goes into liquidation, in case it does, then the liquidator is the person who will be basically, the insolvency professional can be appointed as a liquidator to liquidate the assets and distribute the proceeds to the creditors. Then you look at representative of a creditor in committee of creditors. One can always be a representative of a creditor in the committee of creditors as an insolvency professional. Representative of a class of creditors, again, when you talk about a class of creditors, one can always represent that, become the authorized representative for the class of creditors. Say the home buyers have an authorized representative, let's say, so that can happen. Then there's voluntary liquidator. So that person can, an insolvency professional can always be appointed as a voluntary liquidator for a company which is voluntarily going into liquidation. Voluntary liquidation can be applied by a company where it is a solvent company. So where the company has no large operations, that can always apply for voluntary liquidation. Resolution professional for individuals, partnership and proprietorship firms. So for insolvency resolution process, for individuals, proprietorship concerns and partnership concerns, there again, there can be a requirement, but this will happen only once these sections are notified. Presently, it is only available to personal guarantors for corporate debt or for corporate debtors. So that is the only part that is currently notified, and slowly this other part perhaps will also get notified. Then you have bankruptcy trustees. What is bankruptcy? When you talk about liquidation, liquidation is there for companies. When you talk about individuals, you can't make them you can't liquidate individuals, right? So you have to you use the word bankruptcy. Bankruptcy in the traditional period or the English law traditionally has always been a criminal offense. That how can you not pay people's money? So it was seen as a criminal offense, but now bankruptcy is seen as a not as a human, not as a crime, but it is now seen as something that might happen to anyone, and it needs to be provided for so that that person can start a new life and start a fresh life. Then one can promote an insolvency professional entity. So IPE can always be made by an IP. IP need to be partners in the IPE to make an IPE. Then you look at resolution professional for PPIRP. What is PPIRP? Pre-packaged insolvency resolution plan. What is different in PPIRP as compared to CIRP? Can anyone tell me?
PPIRP is only for MSMEs.
Very good, sir. Very good.
And insolvency professional is engaged by the MSME data himself, corporate data.
All right. What else is different, sir? Anything else that you feel?
He will propose the package to the creditors.
Right.
Whereas in the case of the normal CIRP, the insolvency professionals recommended or recommended creditor. In case of financial creditors
Just a second. So now this number has increased from 3,500 to 3,670, but the IPs having AFA have decreased from 2,532 to 2,373. So there is a dip in this number. Fewer IPs have taken AFAs during this COVID period, and when you look at 30th June numbers, the AFA, the IPs with AFA numbers has actually dropped. You look at geographical distribution of IPs, you will find that IPs are widely distributed across the country. A few states have a lot of IPs, like Delhi has 733 IPs. Then you can find a big number in Maharashtra, about 699. You can find a decent number in Tamil Nadu, then West Bengal. So you find a lot of IPs in Uttar Pradesh also, and so on. So the idea is that you can always look up your state and find the number of IPs there. That is the idea. Then age-wise profile, if you look at that, you will find that most IPs are basically in the age group of 40 to 50, but they're mostly evenly distributed between 40 to 50, 50 to 60, and 60 to 70 age. Why are the IPs having AFA 0 from 70 years and above? Because the regulations don't allow people above the age of 70 to hold AFA. So that is why this number is absent here, but you understand the point that yes, it is something that it is always a good age to become an IP, and that's what the idea is. Then look at voluntary liquidation, and there again there is a lot of work. You can always wind up no longer required by the promoters or the stakeholders, and you can wind them up if they are solvent companies. So this kind of a job keeps coming up now and then, and yes, you can always complete these jobs. Then look at commencement of voluntary liquidations. So here you kind of one can say that yes, what are the voluntary liquidations which have been commenced, what have been the closures. So this is the number there, and a decent number of companies have already been closed under voluntary liquidation process. It's a very fast process as compared to the earlier processes, which at times could have been much slower. So here you find that bank resolution process for resolution professional for individuals, partnerships. So basically personal guarantors to corporate debtors. This is the part that has been notified so far. Partnership firms, proprietorship concerns, all other individuals, it is yet to be notified. And this is the scope of work and prepare. And then you have to handhold the individual and make sure that all his assets are disclosed, all his assets are perhaps used to find a resolution to his insolvency problem. And where the insolvency does not happen, or insolvency is not resolution is not possible, there the resolution professional for individuals then becomes a bankruptcy trustee, and then tries and sells the assets of the individual and distributes those to the creditors of the individual.
Ankit ji, can I ask a question?
Go ahead, please.
Actually, if suppose a liquidator is appointed, and that liquidator is liquidating the asset of a company or an individual, whosoever is the case, and suppose the liquidator want to get a very good price for the assets under liquidation, and he has say invited parties, and finally the good price he got with the party, and some advance, etc. That party has deposited. Now, if that party is delaying in payment, and ultimately it's delaying the total process of liquidation. So what are the remedies for liquidator to we can extend the timeline, or he can seize the amount? What are the remedies for liquidator?
The normal course is to exercise the forfeiture provision. So whenever an auction happens and somebody has participated in that, it is frequently done that, or what is frequently done is that the advance, or the I would say honest money deposit, it can be forfeited in case the liquidator does not, or in case the applicant or the person who has shown interest in buying the property does not pay the balance amount within the time limit. Of course, there can always be a lenient view on this in case of some special issues or special problems. But the normal course is that you stick by the timelines, unless and until there is a gap, or there is a deficit, or there is a problem at the end of the company, or other issues.
So how much time we can allow the other party?
Normally 30 days or 60 days time is allowed. It is already prior, it is already set prior to the auction process. That is, how many days will the party have to pay the remaining balance.
And after that period expires, whether that liquidator can extend the time further.
That's what I'm saying. One has to take a very, very calculated call, because somebody can always say that yes, had there would have been there more time, then maybe somebody else would also have been able to give that kind of value. So time is important to everyone, because everyone then wants to close the case and take the money home, and then wind up the case. So I think I can't give a general answer whether that should be done or not. I think it will depend on case to case.
Okay, thank you.
So for a bankruptcy trustee, again, if the individual process, or for proprietorship concerns, partnership concerns, the process does not go forward, and yes, the insolvency is not feasible, or the settlement or resolution is not possible, then as I said, bankruptcy trustee gets appointed, and the bankruptcy trustee then takes control of all the assets, tries to sell them, and then realize the amount, and then pay the creditors. When you talk about an IPE's sole objective is to provide support services to IPs who are its partners or directors. This has changed now. Now the IPE can give support services to insolvency professionals, irrespective whether they're its partners or directors. An IPE can be formed as a company, LLP, or a registered partnership firm. Minimum net worth requirement is rupees 1 crore. Majority of its shares or capital contribution is held by IPs who are its directors or partners, and majority of its whole-time directors or designated partners are IPs. One IP can become a partner or director of one IPE only. So that is the IPE concept, IPE funda. If you look at the number of IPEs registered, then that is the number 83 IPEs which were there at the end of March 21. We try and figure and give you a number which give you. Now it is 84. So now the number has gone up by 1. So it is 84 is a number that is now relevant. Then you look at opportunities for professionals other than IPs. So anyone who wants to know more about opportunities as an insolvency professional under IBC, apart from whatever I've discussed, anyone has any comments, suggestions on opportunities for professionals as insolvency professionals?
Please.
Okay.
Please elaborate.
No, I said that I've just talked about how the insolvency professionals can have opportunities under IBC. If there are any questions on that, you can share those. Otherwise, I will move on to the topic of having opportunities for professionals other than IPs. So basically, IBC also throws a lot of opportunities at professionals who are not insolvency professionals. So I'm going to discuss that. So what all can the insolvency professional do? The insolvency professional can provide what all can a normal professional do or a CA professional do? He can provide support services to insolvency professionals. Insolvency professionals need support services at various stages of the insolvency process. They might need support in verifying the claims. They might need support in getting some accounts updated, getting some income tax, GST matters sorted out. So it gets a huge support services list that can be provided. Then advisor to corporate debtors undergoing corporate insolvency resolution process is again something that is there. Consultations to entities under financial stress, that is something that professionals can do who know about IBC. They can talk about IBC as one of the options. Then protection against insolvency attacks and recovery of business debtors and advances through IBC. Advisor to resolution applicants who are taking over companies, transactions, audit or forensic audits, services of a registered valuer, consultancy under Sashakt scheme. So all these are options that a professional can choose and do. Then we talk about details of information with NESL, and here we talk about how the information utilities function is working. So there is a concept called information utility built within IBC, and this information utilities concept is basically about the idea that if somebody has given any credit to somebody else, then he must inform the information utility, and that information utility will be able to then use that data to give to give more reliant updations and ratings for the process. So then there are other support services to insolvency professionals like preparation of information memorandum and financial operations of corporate debtor for the previous 2 years, claim verification process, evaluation of assets and liabilities as at the date of commencement of CARP, examination of resolution plans submitted to resolution professional, internal audit during CARP, stock audit during CARP, statutory audits in case RP wants to change the auditor, right? So all these are compliances which are required for the purpose of rendering support services to insolvency professionals. You can do all these jobs for an IP when the IP is trying to run the company. Then talk about advisor to corporate debtor undergoing corporate insolvency resolution process. So here you talk about strategy for dealing with the corporate insolvency resolution process, compiling all the information required by resolution professional, preparation, submission, and discussion on resolution plan. If corporate debtor is permitted to submit, then advisor to corporate debtor for getting the forensic transaction audit conducted, identifying and evaluating reasons for financial stress of the corporate debtor, arriving at sustainable debt of the corporate debtor, and proposing a financial structure for revival. So all these are possible works that one can do as an advisor to corporate debtor who is undergoing the CRP process. Then you have consultations to entities under financial stress, including options and threats under IBC. You can do all these jobs and basically give consultation to entities which are facing an insolvency threat. So it is all about, say somebody is having a due that he's not able to pay, and he wants to mitigate the risk and safeguard himself from that process. So in that case, the entities under the financial stress, and they can then try and approach a professional who can guide them on how to safeguard themselves from the process and not allow CARP to start against the company wherever they're interested in that not happening. Then protection against insolvency attacks and recovery of debts with IBC. So one can identify defaults by identification of defaults by a person and protecting from insolvency attacks. So that is again something that many companies now need. They say that, okay, if we are not paid somebody's dues, how do we protect ourselves? How do we raise a dispute so that the company is not required to pay those dues at a later date? Then advisor to resolution applicants for taking over companies. So guiding clients for taking over companies under IBC, complete advisory services for strategy, preparation of documents, process and implementation for submission of resolution plan to take over a corporate debtor. All these are roles where as an advisor to resolution applicant for taking over companies. So you can always find out that, okay, what are the companies which are interested in taking over other companies, and then advise them as to what should be the process, what should be the resolution plan, what should be the money, what should be the negotiation that they need to do with the COC and so on, so that they can take over the companies. Then transactions audit or forensic audit. So investigations, analysis and determination of transactions under section 43, 45, 50 and 66 of IBC. So these are all transaction audit or forensic audit requirements which one can take care of. And the idea is that one has to find out preferential transactions, undervalued transactions, extortionate transactions, and fraudulent transactions as part of the process. So preferential transactions talk about the idea that if you were supposed to pay maybe 100 people And the idea is that you were supposed to pay in priority to the bank, but instead of paying to the bank, you have paid an old outstanding that was outstanding from you. Then that repayment is understood to be a preferential transaction. Then undervalue transaction is where you have sold some assets at a value which is less than their fair value. Extortionate credit transactions, it can be about uh, uh, some transactions where you have been paying a very high interest rate. So extortionate credit transaction is what they call it. Fraudulent transactions, and all transactions with the intent of defrauding the creditors are covered under fraudulent transactions. So IBA registration is preferred by PSBs or public sector banks, which appoint forensic auditors, or which rather permit the insolvency professional to appoint auditors. And there the IBA registration is then preferred by PSBs. So complete independence and a character and profile which is not influenced by external pressure is required in this case. Any questions on any part that we just discussed? Any questions from anyone? So then there are opportunities as registered valuer. Now, registered valuers are many now. There are about 4,000. So this is the figure as on March 21, and it has only increased thereafter to about 4,400 registered valuers in the entire country. And these are the list of various registered valuer organizations which are paneling, which are allowing registered valuers to register with them. And of course, if you look at this, then the biggest is IOV, followed by ICAI, registered valuer organization. So these are one of the biggest. And there is PVAI, CVR, STA, and then you have others as well, IIV, ICSI, and so on. So the idea is that there are a lot of RVOs which are doing work in this area, and which are adding members to their team. Then we have registered valuer entities. So there are about 42 entities as on date, as on June number. And of course, RVEs are basically, many RVEs are having multiple asset classes. Many RVEs are also having single or two asset classes, depending on what is their objective in practicing as an RVE. When you practice inside an RVE for all asset classes, then you're able to take up any assignment, and there you can then also give a common report to the client for all the asset classes, which is that report, where the report is based on common common principles and standards. Then you have registration of RVs till March 31st. So this is how the RV registration has increased. A good number was added in 1819, and then of course it has been a decent number that is added every quarter. And the idea is that yes, these RVs are very few in number still, as compared to the total work that is available for various registered valuers across the country. Region-wise registered valuers, there are a lot of valuers in the south with a lot of land and building valuers based in the southern Indian region, and that is a big number here. And then of course we have North India, and then Western India, and Eastern India following that number. This is the kind of spread of registered valuers. You will find, a very small number in many places. So yes, it's always good idea to try to become a registered valuer. And then, because this is something where a lot of people prefer the local valuers, and objective of various RVEs also is to have a network of registered valuers at various places across India. Age profile of RVs, most of them 50 to 60, and then yes, there are many people who are between 30 to 40, 40 to 50, and so on. So what do you do as a registered valuer? You are as a registered valuer, you are registered under Companies Act 2013, and the Companies Act 2013 has a section called 247. The 247 section then talks about how all valuations under Companies Act will be done by a registered valuer. Then it points out to the rule, and under the rules and under the guidance, IBBI has been given the mandate to take care of or be the regulator for valuers for now. And there the company's registered values and valuation rules 2017 give a detailed, have the detailed rules about the conduct and the way the valuers should work and be regulated and be admitted and be pass examinations and so on. So two examinations are both of them are decent difficulty level examinations. The IP examination is also an examination which requires 60% pass marks, and it also has a 25% negative marking for you not knowing the answer of a question. And similarly, you have a similar set of a similar examination for IPs also. Then you have registered valuers. So 16 registered valuers. So basically, basically the idea was that yes, this is how the registered valuers first got their registration certificate, and then of course after that, since July 2018, many other have also then been added in the whole process. Eligibility for becoming a registered valuer. So one has to be registered with IBBI as a valuer. You have to be a member of an RVO. You have to pass an examination which is conducted by IBBI. Qualification required. We'll look at the separate chart. One then has to be a resident Indian, not an undischarged insolvent, not a minor, not an unsound mind, not convicted, and so on. Then one should have not been levied a penalty under Section 271J of Income Tax Act. A company or partnership entity can also be registered as a registered valuer if the same has been set up for rendering professional or financial services, including valuation services. So three or all the partners or directors are registered valuers. So in that case, one can be a registered valuer. Then if you look at demand of registered valuers is of course increasing. More and more people are requiring valuations under Companies Act, SEBI, IBC, and liquidation process. And then Sashakt scheme also requires registered valuers to do valuations. And we also see draft FEMA rules wherein the ODI rules or ODI guidelines are proposed to be replaced such that the valuations now will be required by a registered valuer instead of a merchant banker or by a chartered accountant. So then there are other valuations required under these sections of 50C, 55A, 56, and 5611 UA, wherein the various valuers are required to do the valuation. Under Companies Act, there are all these sections which require valuation, and as per Section 247, no person other than a registered valuer can do these valuations. It has to be a registered valuer who will do these valuations under Companies Act. One can give this valuation examination for SFA class as long as he has 3 years of experience in the discipline after completing graduation, or basically at least 5 years and 3 years of experience in case of graduate level degree. So this is the qualification. So you can always look into details and see whether you're qualified to give this examination. Consultancy under such a scheme of RBI. So here the RBI circular dated 12th February 2019 for internal structuring of defaulted debts. This came out. This notification has since been used by various entities which were under stress to restructure their debt. And as part of this requirement, as part of this consultancy, one can really give a consultancy and kind of make sure that or help those companies which are under under a crisis to come out of it in a way that they can continue their business. So discussing about NCLT option for companies under financial stress. So section 10 allows a company to go to CIRP or start CIRP suo moto without somebody else taking it to taking the company to insolvency. The company can itself file for insolvency. And in that case, the corporate applicant can be anyone. It can be corporate debtor, it can be a member or partner who is authorized under a constitutional document, an individual who is in charge of managing the operations and resources of the corporate debtor, a person who has the control and supervision over financial affairs of the corporate debtor, and so on. Then when a corporate debtor should suo moto go to NCLT, so we look at undischarged, insolvent, willful defaulter, NPA count of more than 1 year, or the entire overdue amounts are paid with interest, then convicted for any offense for 2 years or more for any acts under 12th schedule, or 7 years or more. So all these are persons who are not eligible to be resolution applicant under 29A. So in case you are a corporate debtor or you are a promoter of a corporate debtor and you feel that yes, your company is basically covered under section 29A, then maybe the CIRP process is not for you, because there is no way you can get the company back to yourself from the process. So there is a justification for corporate debtors going to CIRP. The restructuring of stress at the initial stage before CIRP becomes ineligible for submission of resolution plan. So you can go early before the NPA becomes too long, because in case the NPA sticks for 1 year, then you don't have an option. And situation can be controlled before the business is getting an adverse impact. So in case you have little problems, you think that you want to restructure it, and you're not finding support from banks, then you can maybe choose to go ahead and rather than losing your credibility or customer trust, you can think of insolvency as a means to renew that trust. Voluntary liquidation, earlier option with the promoters was either to make the company a zombie company or drag it along unlawfully. So that is something that this option is better, because the promoters are able to then spare their time and do some positive activities rather than keep running a zombie company. Then there is always this other option to start phoenixing and indulge in unlawful activities. So all that can also be prevented. Then you have justification for corporate debtor going to NCLT. Again, there are other possibilities where banks are not doing any restructuring in the last 2-3 years, and NPA classification has been delayed, and so on. But basically looking at a possibility or a system where the companies have to have some rescue that can happen, where the problem lies with the debt, and even in case the problem does not lie with the excessive debt, one can then still go for CIRP, but then maybe the final outcome of that will be liquidation only. Then there are certain apprehensions when a company goes into NCLT or to NCLT for CIRP. Investor confidence sometimes is lost. Promoters may lose the CD, or someone else might take it. The entire process can be declared as malified, and promoters may be debarred from participating into the bidding process. Forensic auditor may find some transactions which bar the promoters from taking the company. Then there is a company called LML. So there what happened was that the promoters took the company to NCLT, but then the promoters were not able to take it back because the because the court said that because there was a retrospective amendment or an amendment wherein after that amendment they were not
Yes,
able
sir.
to take the company back. Then looking at opportunities for professionals under PPIRP. Now here we look at PPIRP, which is pre-packaged insolvency resolution plan. So as I was discussing that in here, the banks and FIs would be interested in restructuring under this structure because of committee approach and market value approach. And lenders will prefer this approach as most of the times the PPIRP cost would be borne by the corporate debtor. CD would also prefer this route as it is less expensive, less intensive, lower stigma, less disruptive, faster and quicker. And proper checks and balances have also been built into the process. So CD will prefer this process to circumvent pressure of multiple applications under section 7 or 9. Then when we talk about PPIRP, that also throws a lot of opportunities for professionals. So RP will get fee from CD, RP will work on the base resolution plan and preliminary information memorandum. Professionals other than insolvency professionals can also take up the assignment and appoint an IP after in-principle decisions are taken by FCs. Mergers and acquisitions of those companies with some financial stress can be handled under PPIRP, and then sale of business can be routed through PPIRP. Then we look at insolvency attacks. So one should then one can always render these services. One can safeguard the corporate debtor and its assets in case IRP is appointed under IB code. And the IRP shall then make all efforts and endeavors to protect and preserve the value of the property. And then the IRP has all powers to manage the operations and run the business. Memorandum, a moratorium is assured. The bank account is then taken over by the RP and it is run by them. Right. So this is how the RP then safeguards the interest of the corporate debtor and tries to maximize the value which is available to the resolution applicant and to the creditors. Then what can CAs do under IBC and as auditors of companies under financial stress? So role of CAs, particularly statutory auditors, is very important. Many balance sheets that we see that yes, the inventories were high, the debtors were high, and yes, when we see on the ground, we see no debtors, no credit, no inventories. So it is time that all the auditors who are signing such balance sheets then kind of control their mandate and basically bring out more trust into the financial statements that they are signed. So if IRP is having the authority to access the books of accounts and all that, then punishment for falsification of books of the CD is available. Section 147 again talks about punishment for contravention of the various provisions of not giving or not supporting the IP. Section 147 further provides that the auditor will refund the remuneration taken from the company and pay compensation and damage to members, creditors, and government authorities. National Financial Reporting Authority has been set up with vast powers, and there is a possibility of complaints against erring CAs to NFRA, and powers are very large. All depends upon the regulator. So like IBBI, if complaint will be there, then there will be a response. So basically IBBI takes its complaints or complaints against any person very seriously, and that is where a lot of problem can come across for the auditor. Practical tips. So basically one has to look at the diversion, one has to look at various circulars. So this master circular on willful defaulters talks about how if the banks find any willful defaulter, in that case they can also, or a statutory auditor supporting it, then they can of course escalate it or report it to ICAI. Then standards of auditing, 240, section 143 of Companies Act, carve-out clauses 41, ICA has given then notices to the auditors of IL&FS. So this is how you need to make sure that yes, you are not into a soup which wherein you can't escape that. So what are these issues? You see business cycle starts increasing. What is the business cycle? It is the period from which the inventory of the RM or the raw material is purchased and then it is converted and then it is sold to the debtors. So that credit's business cycle really increases. And that means losses are being parked in current assets to deceive the creditors and present a rosy picture. Zombie company scenario means carrying the corpse duly decorated with the objectives of defrauding the creditors. Diversion of funds out by padding up the purchase for the purpose of personal use of funds, increasing the closing stock to declare profit, not recording rejections, debit notes. So, all these are indications that you should then, as an auditor, point out and say that, no, this is not done. These are all tactics which can put the auditor also in trouble in future. Then auditor outstanding balances are not squared, reconciled, or reconciled up bill to bill. Bill to bill reconciliation is very important. So in case that doesn't happen, that means that something is wrong. Third party confirmation is also necessary at times. Asset verification is primary duty of the auditor. In case not verifiable, then that has to be reported. Auditor's responsibility in reporting is the same as discussed earlier. So this is how, then you look at evergreening, that you say that debt never comes down. So you repay one debt, you get another debt, you repay another debt, you get another one. Business cycle continuously goes up. Third party confirmations of receivables are not obtained. So these are some signs when you need to understand that yes, something is going wrong. So what do? You we need to understand the principles of putting red flags or issuing guarded warnings to the bankers and the stakeholders. And what do we do? We talk about evergreening. We say the debt never comes down. We talk about business cycle continuously going up. We talk about third party confirmation the receivables are not obtained. Physical verification of inventory or fixed assets is not allowed or not liked. Market credit is also increasing constantly. So these are all red flags that one has to take care of. One has to observe when doing an audit. So first is a warning to himself as auditor and start detailed due diligence. The auditor has to do a detailed due diligence, make sure that he has proper documentation for his own safeguarding, then report all facts and observations in the audit report or CARO, comply with the RBI master circular, comply with the standards of auditing and duties under section 143, and he must verify the financial statements submitted to banks and other creditors and also uploaded on the MCA website. So tips for professionals under current crisis: you avail the professional opportunity under IBC, and if not IP, then should practice as a consultant for the benefit of clients. So the idea is that not being an IP and still knowing IBC can help you with the various consultations that your clients can benefit from. Then you should adopt the profession of registered valuers. It is an upcoming field. Valuers being a registered valuer is very important today because a lot of valuation opportunities are coming up. And as the government is thinking of shifting everything to the registered valuer framework, more and more opportunities will be added in time, where FEMA related valuations, income tax related valuations, valuations required under various other provisions and acts will slowly perhaps come to the registered valuers itself. Then you have multiple sources of income that will reduce your dependence on auditees, and you can increase your independence also as auditor. Then early detection of stress and default regime is always there. Insolvency attacks on companies by operational creditors, workers, and government authorities is also, of course, a very important step that you should take care of in the welfare of your clients. Forensic audit in each case under CIRP, and forensic auditors are also reporting connivance of statutory auditors in most reports. NFRA is there, which is watching and which is basically now looking closely at various audit reports. Section 147, 132 of Companies Act is important. Section 147, 117 and 71 of IBC talks about connivance and punishing the professionals who are causing damage or who are part of the fraud. Then RBI master circular, proper auditing, due diligence. So these are the requirements that are today's requirement. So with that, my presentation comes to end. I can take some questions. and I can talk about what else might be of interest with respect to IBC, with respect to professional development, that with respect to registered valuers, forensic auditors. I can talk about all that and understand and give you a perspective of how these additional qualifications or these additional licenses can help you grow your professional practice.
मेंबर्स रिक्वेस्ट है, कोई भी क्वेश्चन किसी के दिमाग में है तो अभी सर से पूछ सकते हैं हम. मिस्टर अमरनाथ जी भी लाइन पे.
अमरनाथ जी आप म्यूटेड हैं. अमरनाथ जी आज म्यूटेड है.
हाँ जी, जिसको भी क्वेश्चन पूछना है तो अपना माइक ऑन करके डायरेक्ट क्वेश्चन पूछ सकते हैं सर से, क्योंकि आईपी
अपना कोई इनपुट भी दे सकते हैं कि आप क्या
आईपी
सोचते हैं
प्रोफेशन
आईपी के बारे में,
लाइफ
आरवीज के बारे
प्रोफेशन
में.
नहीं है, और हमारे चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट के लिए न्यू स्कोप है, बहुत अच्छा स्कोप है इसमें, और कह सकता हूँ कि ऑडिट से निकल के देखा जाए तो इसी में स्कोप ज्यादा नजर आ रहा है आने वाले टाइम में.
Very good presentation, Ankit ji. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prasad. Any questions, any inputs, any experience that you can share? Yes.
Can you please share this presentation?
Yes, sure. Why not?
सर ये प्रेजेंटेशन जो भी मेल आईडी से आपने ज्वाइन किया है, मैं उस मेल पे आपको फॉरवर्ड कर दूंगा सर.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद.
ओके सर, थैंक यू सर.
और what are the prospects for forensic auditors?
One, there is a prospect in IBC. There are whatever cases come under IBC, there is a requirement for a transaction audit. So there is a lot of work there. Then there is a lot of work which banks give to forensic auditors, because wherever the accounts are more than 50 crores of borrowings, they have to go for a forensic audit now and again. And then wherever they have to restructure an account, there also forensic audit is required. So the numbers are lesser. As on date, the IBM paneled forensic auditors, I think, number to about 300 or 400 odd firms. So with that lower number, it becomes an attractive proposition. But then, yes, I have seen that values are going down in the forensic audit fee. And unfortunately, what happened to stock audits has now started happening to forensic audits also, where the objective has become to, to earn from the other side. Now, so ethical practice is something, if somebody wants to do an ethical practice, one might have to face some challenges with respect to the fee that is involved. And forensic audit requires some investment into softwares, into, some devices, wherein you are able to then collect and extract information from digital evidence. But yes, the future perhaps is forensic audit, because with the computerization that is happening, with the data sizes that is increasing, I don't see any way to escape it.
Can the profession be pursued individually, or should it be a teamwork?
Getting empaneled as part of IBA's list is important for you to get work from banks. IBC work can be obtained even without that. But then the idea is that as an individual, if you're able to build that experience, build those credentials and get work, then that is perfectly okay. But sometimes it becomes difficult to start doing work individually. But when you're in a partnership where somebody else has done some work, then doing work with them becomes more convenient.
May I ask you something?
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Namaskar, sir.
Sir, Namaskar, Dharam Singh, Namaskar, Goel. I want to know how lucrative is it actually even to do the regular audit and to get the fees from the clients? No, is a real challenge. And this being a complicated this thing, normally these audit fees is entered into at the auditor's choice or the market. How is it exactly determined?
The fees for forensic audit?
No, IP.
IP. The IP fee is again market driven. There is no limit or there is no regulation which says that the fee should be this much. and the
But-
fees has come down as compared to when it started. In the beginning, we talked about fees of 20 lakh rupees a month and so on. But now we're looking at a fee of 3-4 lakh rupees a month, and the process is now widely understood. Complicated cases may still have a higher fee today, so it totally depends on
agreement with
building that trust agreement with the banks. The banks don't want to pay much in most cases, but then yes, with some credentials with you, you can always get a decent fee. But then the idea is that even in IPs today, in case you become an IP, it will become almost a requirement for you to join an IPE, which has some past experience. Otherwise, for banks to give you a case with you not having a single case experience will be difficult. But the moment they say that, yes, you have an IPE with you who can handhold the operations and who can guide you, then there is an increased chance of you getting an assignment in your own name.
But there is no separate protection from this thing, no, of getting this fees back after getting everything done. If the fellow
No,
suddenly
that way the you can't. So nobody vanishes here as long as the company has some assets. Your fee will be paid. There is assurance. When it will be paid, maybe that is not assured, but your fee has to be paid. Because the first priority under the waterfall mechanism of making payments is for the CIRP cost, which includes the fee payable to the resolution professional.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
What is the maximum time taken in resolution of a case so far? Any
Some
major
cases
case?
are still continuing. When they started in 2016, they're still going on. So of course the government has said that 330 days is the maximum limit, and the courts have supported it. But then there are some cases which are really complex, wherein their assets are attached, they are not able to find a resolution. They have gone to the court multiple times, found a fresh lease of life in the resolution process. Some unpopular or infamous cases are JP case. JP case is a case which has kept on going the loop. And there are various cases where the ED has taken over the assets. So in that case, again, sometimes that gets stuck. Yeah.
Complicated.
All right. Any other questions? Amarnath ji, you were saying something.
I think sir कोई question अभी आ नहीं रहा audience की तरफ से.
I think there's something wrong with Amarnath ji's audio. We are not able to hear you, Amarnath ji.
हाँ, actually वो मैंने फोन से कनेक्ट किया हुआ ना.
अमरनाथ जी आप थोड़ा लाउडली बोलिए ना.
नहीं एक्चुअली इशू ये हो रहा है, मेरा नेट का इशू है आज यार. ये फोन से कनेक्ट करना पड़ा मेरे को. अभी आ रही है आवाज क्या?
हाँ,
अभी आ रही है आपकी आवाज.
हाँ, actually I was saying कि if suppose in connection to my earlier query only, if suppose
आप तो मोबाइल से बात कर रहे हो तो थोड़ा पास कर लो, मुझे आवाज आ जाएगी.
हाँ, एक सेकंड. हाँ, इसमें अंकित जी, in continuous to my last query only, like here banks are actually the party na, who are appointing liquidator or insolvency professionals. Suppose insolvency professional is not allowing time or want to forfeit the money, whether that other party can approach banks or other creditors to allow some time, so that again if they go for rebidding and other liquidation process, so it will take much time, like 3 months, 4 months, another 4 months, instead of going for that.
Normally the resolution applicant has to go to NCLT, and in normal circumstances, in case there is a delay up to which the COC or the delay is not that much that nobody in the COC has any objection, then the courts and the COC, they all agree that okay, this delay is okay. They all accept the delay. But say, I will give you an example. Somebody says, okay, I have a resolution plan, and it does not pay for an year's time, for an year. In that case, for an year for COC to wait for the process to, gets completed is painful. So there again, it will become difficult perhaps at that point in time for any court to support that kind of a delay.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, you are right. That way means.
But then if it is all about 15 days, 30 days, in 15 days, 30 days, maybe the process will not even restart, right?
Yes, you're right. Okay, thank you, Ankit ji. I think my issues are resolved by that with this. Thank you. धर्म जी और कोई क्वेश्चन है तो आप देख लीजिए.
फोन ऑन हो गया लग रहा है सबका.
So all right then, I think we had a good interaction with everyone. Thank you all those participants who had an interactive discussion with us, with me, and it was a learning session for me as well. Thank you, Dharamji. Thank you,
thank you, sir. And
thank you others who interacted with us.
Now I request to CA Amarnath Yadav. Please formal welcome. Thanks to our audience and our today guest speaker, CA Ankit Goyal ji. सर वैसे मेरी तरफ से बताऊं बहुत अच्छी प्रेजेंटेशन थी और मेंबर्स को पता लगा कि क्या स्कोप है, कैसे है, क्या करना है हमें, तो ये सर इसलिए पता अजय. तो अमरनाथ जी प्लीज माइक इन योर हैंड नाउ.
थैंक यू धर्म जी.
अमरनाथ जी थोड़ा लाउडली बोलना पड़ेगा आपको.
Just hold on. First of all, I'll just thank Ankit Goyal ji from our C4 CP Study Circle that you have spared your valuable time for us. And Ankit ji has actually agreed in a very short notice period, and he has agreed to give us such a beautiful presentation on various opportunities for our chartered accountants in this IBC and this valuation professional. Sir, thanks a lot. Thank you very much for giving such a nice presentation and explaining all the nitty-gritties of these courses in detail. What are the opportunities and what are the processes? Every aspect I think you have covered in great detail, sir. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Ankit ji, and we will look forward in future also for your support and guidance in these specialized area which you have. Thanks a lot, Ankit ji.
Thank you, ji. Thank you, Amarnath ji.
हमारे लिए आज बड़ा सौभाग्य की बात है कि हमारे साथ BHEL के GM CA अनंत सनम जी हैं. तो सर इंडस्ट्री पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से आप तो ऑडिट में बहुत टाइम से सर ऑडिट प्रोफाइल ही देखते हैं, तो सर मेंबर्स को कुछ फीडबैक इंडस्ट्री पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से मिल जाए तो वो भी एक फ्यूचर में अपना रोड मैप तैयार कर सकते हैं सर. तो आज हमारे थोड़ा सा सर व्यू आप भी हमें दीजिए और मेंबर्स को भी मार्गदर्शन कीजिए सर, प्लीज सर.
Today we are in a very dicey situation, and the last 2 years has put several corporates into a different kind of a mode. Although the path of recovery is okay for many, but there is no assurance, and with so many risks, every company is witnessing a very tough path. And those who have already filed the applications and those who are already in process, they are expecting some resolution and all that. It is really a painful state of affair. They are made to wait. And as he was also telling, Goyal sir was also telling me, the 330 days limit is there in the code. But invariably, because of the situations which are not in the control of many, the information compiling or the interactions or the cross-examinations or the transaction audits or all the issues which are related to the final closure or the resolution process, it is really taking a hell of a lot of time and energy of several professionals. That is the true face of things today. We'll hope that things will definitely improve. It is a good mechanism that at least now an awareness has spread that I cannot just go without it. There are resolution mechanisms which give confidence to the industry per se. Unless that confidence per se is there, the risk factor is very high for many corporates. Definitely people will make use of it, and the number of cases, as I was seeing, the number of cases that are settled is not that bad. Again, 4,500 cases around half of it at least were settled, it seems. So there is a good progress, which only will give confidence to those people who are approaching this mechanism for resolution of their issues. Definitely the graph is very sound. It has, the number of cases that is coming up is sixfold in 5 years. That's a very encouraging trend that people's confidence has been considerably increasing over a period of time. We'll see in years to come, those who are sitting here may also become one such professionals, and they also may offer a lecture like this. We are eager to see. Thank you, Goel. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. सर तो थोड़ा सा इंफॉर्मेशन में मेंबर्स को दे दें कि सॉल्वेंसी प्रोफेशन के जो एग्जाम जो होते हैं हमारे, जो जिस तरह से जो कंडक्ट किए जाते हैं, उसकी प्रिपरेशन के लिए हम पूरी कोचिंग क्लास तो नहीं दे सकते, तो हम कुछ प्रोफेशनल जो जिन्होंने आईपी कंप्लीट कर रखा है, जो आईपी में आप पढ़ाते हैं, उनको मेंबर के साथ इंट्रोडक्शन करवाएंगे हम नेक्स्ट अक्टूबर मंथ में। तो उनको थोड़ी हेल्प मिलेगी कि कैसे एग्जाम में प्रिपरेशन हो जाए, कैसे शॉर्ट में पढ़ा जाए, क्योंकि अलाइंस फ्लो इतने हैं, सबको तो एनटीजे को तो पूरा पता है कि इतना वाइड सिलेबस है, तो उसको कैसे कंप्लीट किया जाए। तो कोशिश करेंगे कि 5-6 लेक्चर हमारे सीए और एनजीओ है उसकी तरफ से हम लोग मेंबर्स की तरफ डिलीवर करवाएंगे नेक्स्ट अक्टूबर में। तो अंकित जी से भी रिक्वेस्ट करेंगे कि हमारे साथ सर एक दिन के लिए आप आइए उसमें भी। तो मेंबर्स हमारे साथ वेट करते हैं कि भाई कुछ ना कुछ हम मेंबर्स को किसी भी माध्यम से दें। क्योंकि पीछे एक सीरीज करवाई थी तो पता लगा कि उस सीरीज से 20 आईपी बन गए। मेरे ग्रुप बना हुआ है, उसमें 20 आईपी जो है इंसॉल्वेंसी प्रोफेशन का एग्जाम कंप्लीट कर चुके हैं। तो वो खुशी भी होती है और मेंबर्स कहते हैं नहीं नहीं और करवाइए, वो आगे पीछे कनेक्शन हो जाता है। फिर वो यूट्यूब पे वीडियो ढूंढते हैं, पीपीटी ढूंढते हैं। तो करते करते अभी मेरे पास काफी रिक्वेस्ट आई है, तो फिर सर अक्टूबर मंथ में हम लोग ये अगेन कॉन्टेक्ट करवाने जा रहे हैं सर।
बहुत बढ़िया, I will love to be part of this.
Okay, sir. Thank you on the behalf of Sirifort CP Study Circle. I really thanks to C. Ankit Goyal ji and CAP Anand Sanam ji and C. Amarnath Yadav ji. Thank you, sir.
One minute. Ankit ji, your presentations are excellent. First, I had your program on caveats, limitations, and disclosures. From then on, I started liking your lectures. I had you on so many programs.
प्रसाद सर, आपकी आवाज थोड़ी कम आ रही है, लाउडली बोलोगे तो पता चलेगा मेंबर्स को भी।
हाँ जी, I like Ankit ji's programs very much, presentations. First, I started with his presentation on caveats, limitations, and disclosures. And later, I watched several of his programs. That was very good. Whatever the subject,
There's a problem with the voice, Mr. Prasad, but thank you so much. Thank you for those nice words. It will really allow me to, continue this work. And I've always say that whenever somebody talks about something, it is the best way to learn about that thing. So I think this is what I'm here for. I'm very here for that learning. Thank you so much for your nice words, Mr. Prasad. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Okay.